So we already did 8.9. The first part was factoring, where you had those special cases where you had a perfect square, quadratic, trinomial, and you square rooted, and then you just plugged it into your answer format, your factored form answer format. But right now we're going to be doing the second half of this section, and this is where we end up applying a square root on an equation, and you have to put a plus or minus in front of your answer. So to understand this second half of the section better, let's go over several examples. Let's take a look at this one. X minus 5 equals 7. What's the answer? Without doing any work, what's the answer? 12. Now, why is the answer 12? Because 12 minus 5 equals 7. Of course, you could have actually done your work plus 5 plus 5. You get x equals 12. But logically, when you think what number minus 5, you get 7, the answer is 12. So I just put that one out there to remind you that a solution to an equation is the value that will make it a true statement. So what value would make this a true statement? 3, right? So x equals 3, but there's also a different value that will work if you plug it in where the x is at and then square it. What other value is that? 2 squared is 9? No. So the answer is 3. Why is the answer 3? Because when you plug it in, you get 9, right? When you plug in a 3, you get 9. But there's also another answer besides this answer 3. There's also negative 3, ladies and gentlemen. Because if you plug in negative 3 and you square it, it'll also give you a positive 9. Do we see that? Yes. Now, instead of having to write both x equals 3 and x equals negative 3, we could do this notation, x equals plus or minus 3, okay? Now, what I would like to do is explain this answer of plus or minus 3 in a different way. Instead of logically thinking, what number could I square to get 9, you could think of what we always thought of. Let's get x by itself on one side of the equal sign. So x is here. It has a square. I don't want a square. So how do I get rid of something? I do the opposite. And the opposite of a square is a square root. And what you do to one side, you do to the other side. So when you apply a square root in an equation, you must put a plus or minus in front of your answer. Okay? Keep that in mind. When you apply a square root in an equation, you must put a plus or minus in front of your answer. Okay? So that's true for the rest of Algebra 1. It's true in Algebra 2 or Pre-Calc or any other advanced math class. Whenever you apply a square root in an equation when solving, you have to put a plus or minus in front of your answer. Let's just do one more. If I had an x squared equals 25, if I wanted to get x by itself and I want to get rid of the square, what would I do? I would do the opposite of a square, which is a square root, which you do to one side, do to the other. You end up with your answer, x equals, what is the square root of 5? Square root of 25? It's 5. But what are we going to put in front of our answer? Plus or minus. So that's your answer. Again, what does the plus or minus mean? It means that it could be a positive 5 or it could be a negative 5. Okay? So do we understand that whenever you apply a square root when solving, you have to put a plus or minus in front of your answer? Yeah. Okay. If that makes sense, let's move on to this one right here. Now this one, we have a binomial squared. Okay, a binomial squared. So if I have a binomial squared and I want to get x by itself, I don't want this minus 2, I don't want this square. What could I get rid of first? What should I get rid of first? The square using a square root. So let's apply a square root here, and what you do to one side, you must do to the other. And of course, the square root of 25 is 5, but what do I need to put in front of the answer? Plus or minus, that's right. Now we still have the equal sign, and on the left side, the square root and the square really do eliminate themselves, so you're just going to have the x minus 2 left over. So you have an x minus 2 left over. And then finally, to get x by itself, you're going to have to get rid of that minus 2. So you're going to go plus 2 cancels plus 2. Now, it's kind of weird to add 2 with the plus minus 5. So we're just going to rewrite it. We're going to say x equals 2 plus or minus 5. I write it this way because I like to organize it this way because you actually have to do both the plus and the minus. So x could be 2 plus 5, but it could also be 2 minus 5. That's what the plus or minus actually mean. that it's a plus or a minus. So you have to do both. So you're going to get two answers. One answer is 7. The other answer is -3. So what should you write on your answer column on the test and the day after tomorrow? X equals 7. And you could put and or -3. So those are your two answers. X equals 7. You could put X equals 7, X equals -3, or you could just put 7 and -3. Now those are two answers. Technically you should double check, because when you plug in 7, it should give you a true statement. When you plug in -3, it should give you a true statement. But I'm not sure if it happens on this section, but it does happen later on, and especially in Algebra 2, when you're solving quadratic equations like this, and you plug an answer in and it doesn't work, you call that an extraneous solution, so you wouldn't count it. All right, so it's a good idea to plug in. So if I go 7 right here, 7 minus 2 is 5. 5 squared really does give us the 25. If I plug in a -3 right here, -3 minus 2 is -5, and -5 squared really is positive 25 also, so both work. There are no extraneous solutions. Let's try another one. We have x squared plus 10x plus 25. What do I do?
Oh, the parentheses.
Okay, you can do the parentheses, right?
And then 5 times 5.
5 times 5 is 25.
So 5 plus 5 is 10.
5 plus 5 is 10. So I could do x, 5 plus, right? You could do it that way. Or you could have also have thought, oh, perfect square term, I'm going to square root it. Perfect square term, I'm going to square root it, right? Same exact, I'm just showing different ways of doing it. Square root of x squared is x. Square root of 25 is 5. And you repeat it, x and 5. And then you think, what symbols belong in here? The sign. Well, if this is middle term is positive, they both have to be positive. You can't put one positive, one negative, because that would eliminate the middle term. Okay. Anyway, that's just a review of factoring. We should know how to do that, right? So from here, what you could do is either split them and set them each equal to 0, because there's a 0 there, or sometimes you might not have a 0 here, and you would have to do this. You'd have to rewrite it as x plus 5 squared equals a number. In this case, it's 0. But you might have like a 9 right here, or a 25, or a 16, right? Now, why would I do that? Because I could get rid of the square by applying a square root. So if you square root there and square root there, you're going to get x plus 5 equals plus or minus 0. And of course, a plus or minus 0 doesn't change anything. So you don't even really need the plus or minus 0, but I want you to leave it there because we will have to get used to putting a plus or minus whenever you apply a square root in an equation. So the rest of this would be subtracting 5, x equals -5 plus or minus 0. And that answer is just going to be -5, because it doesn't matter if you add 0 or subtract 0, it's still going to be -5. It doesn't change. So your answer is x equals -5. Let's try another. You know what? For the sake of time, let's just skip this one. Let's go to this one. So from here, we want to solve this equation, and we want to set it first equal to 0 by doing what? Plus 49. Plus 49, which you can't really add, so you're going to rewrite it. 4x squared minus 28x plus 49 equals 0. Why do we want it equal to 0? Because we want to square root, not square root, we want to use zero product property to split it and solve. So at this point, we could square root the first one, square root the last one. And if you were thinking, well, I want to multiply 4 times 49, that's ridiculous because it takes a long time. You'd get a huge number. So it's easier to recognize that you have a perfect square term, and you square root both of them and plug them into your answer format. So what's the square root of 4x squared?
2x.
What's the square root of 49? 7. So you do a 2x and a 7. That's your binomial. Now, if this middle term is a negative, what do these signs have to be? They both have to be negative. You can't have different signs like 1 plus and 1 minus. That would eliminate the middle term. If this one were positive, you'd have both positive. But if it's negative, you want both of these to be negatives. So let's put both the negatives right there. And then from here, you can rewrite it as a binomial squared. Since it's the same exact binomial, 2x minus 7 times 2x minus 7, you could write it as 2x minus 7 squared equals 0. Or you could have also taken both of these and split them and set them each equal to 0, and you'd get the same answer. But anyway, I just want to practice using the square root. Square root there, square root here. Sorry, that's ugly. 2x minus 7 equals plus or minus 0. And then you would add 7. So we'd have to rewrite the whole thing. So let me move this a little to the side. We're going to rewrite the whole thing. It's going to say 2x equals 7 plus or minus 0. And my final step would be to get rid of that 2 by dividing by 2 and dividing by 2, the whole thing by 2. So you end up with x equals, so what we have here is 7 plus or minus 0 divided by 2. Now, this plus or minus 0 is totally unnecessary because 7 plus 0 is still 7. 7 minus 0 is still 7. But I want you to practice putting the plus or minus and whatever number this is right here, because if it were a 3, it would provide you with two different answers. If it were a 3 right there, 7 plus 3 is 10. 10 divided by 2 is 5. One answer would be 5. 7 minus 3 would be 4. 4 divided by 2 is 2. So if you did have an actual number here, you'd end up with two different answers. But because it's plus or minus 0, it's not going to change it at all. So that's your answer right there. 7 halves. 7 halves. So that's one single answer for this question, number 6. Let's jump to our worksheet, the second half of our worksheet from the other day. Now the second half of the worksheet, it says solve each equation, check the solutions, and they want you to use all your different factoring methods that you've already learned, right? If you could pull out a GCF, pull out a GCF. If you have a perfect square term in the front and perfect square term in the back, you might want to square root and plug them into your factored form format. So number 21, for example, that's already ready to square root the left side, square root the right side. It's going to be a square root of 0, which is 0, and you put a plus or minus right in front of that 0, which doesn't change anything. But I want to jump to something a little more interesting, kind of like number 24. That's an interesting one right there. Okay, number 24 is interesting. Why is that? Well, I'm looking at this and I'm like, hey, that's a perfect square term. You know what? That's a perfect square term. This is a perfect square term. If I just look at the left side for a little while, let me ignore the right side. I could factor that. I could either factor it by thinking, oh, the a value is 1, so I'm going to put an x here and an x there. Or I could have thought, oh, perfect square term, the square root of x squared is x, and that's where I got these x's from. And the square root of 36 is 6, so you get 6's right there. And because the middle sign's positive, both of these have to be positive. So plus right there, plus right there. So what I have here is the binomial x plus 6 written twice. And I would like to write it as x plus 6 squared instead of writing it twice. And this is an equation that's set equal to 25. And this is not equal to 0. It's equal to 25. But that's great because 25 is a perfect square number. And if I want to get rid of this square, I'm going to have to apply a square root to the left side and a square root to the right side, because what I do to one side, it must do to the other. So what I end up with is x plus 6 equals, what's the square root of 25?
5.
But what do I have to put in front of the answer?
Plus or minus.
A plus or minus right in front of that 5. So check this out, guys. The 6, I need to get rid of the 6. I need to get x by itself. So what do? Minus 6, minus 6. Now at this point, this is where we write it out. Check it out. X equals, I have the minus 6, but I have a plus or minus 5 right next to it. And that will actually give us two answers. Negative 6 plus 5 and negative 6 minus 5. So when we think, what is negative 6 plus 5? That answer is negative 1. How about negative 6 minus 5? That answer is negative 11. So we actually get two answers for this. Whoops. We get two answers for this equation, number 24. The answer is x equals negative 11, comma, negative 1. or you can put x equals negative 11 and negative 1, or you can put x equals negative 11, x equals negative 1, whatever you want. But I need to see both of those answers, this one and this one, on your answer column on the test day after tomorrow. Okay, now not all of them are going to work out beautifully like that. Like, let's take a look at 27 here. What should I do there?
Minus 13.
I mean, if you ignore the left side for a little while, ignore the left side, or the right side, what could you do with the left side?
3 and 2, W.
Yeah, you could do the W's. And what times what is positive 9 that if you add together is negative 6?
3. Negative 3.
A negative 3 and a negative 3, correct?
Yes.
So you could rewrite this as W minus 3 squared. Now, see, the reason why I'm rewriting it as W minus 3 squared is because I do not have an equals 0. I have an equals 13, right? So it's not equal to 0. So the reason why I write W minus 3 squared is because I could get rid of the square by applying a square root. So I'm going to apply a square root there, apply a square root there. I will have W minus 3 equals, you have to put a plus or minus in front of your answer. The thing is, the square root of 13 is irrational, right? So we're just going to leave it as a square root of 13, but I still need to put that plus or minus right in front of that square root of 13. So I still need one more step to get W by itself. I'd have to add 3 here and add 3 over here. So my final answer is going to be W equals, we have this plus 3, positive 3. Let me put a positive 3 right there. And then we have this plus or minus square root of 13. And since we can't do the square root of 13, we leave it like that, plus or minus square root of 13. And this is the answer. If you check your answer on the back of the worksheet, it leaves it like that. W is 3 plus or minus the square root of 13. Cool? All right, so finish up solving the equation on the second half. And the next thing I'll be giving you is a practice or study guide for the actual test the day after tomorrow.